any community or had voluntarily severed ties with one. Some gave up their land after going bankrupt. Others did so seeking advancement in service. Mushkenum held land on royal territory and served the government. Their activities were managed by city administrators, many of whom were themselves Mushkenum. This estate could simultaneously include both lesser status farmers and state officials. Finally, the third estate consisted of slaves or wardom. Among them were captured warriors or people who had lost their freedom after committing a crime or failing to repay debts. Slaves could belong to the king, a temple, or a private individual. All of a slave's meager possessions were considered the property of their master. Slaves were legally equivalent to objects that could be sold or pledged. If someone maimed a slave or took their life, it was considered nothing more than damaging or destroying someone else's property. The guilty party compensated only for the material loss. But here is the crucial point. In Babylon, no one was born without rights. If a slave woman and a free man had children, those children were free, even if the father did not acknowledge them. The enslaved mother could not be sold. She remained in the household with her children. Many of Hammurabi's laws were based on the principle of talion, equal retribution, an eye for an eye. However, liability for crimes depended on social standing. For instance, if a free man damaged the eye of another free man, the offender's eye was destroyed in return. But if a free man knocked out the eye of a mushkenum, the accused paid about 1 pound of silver. For injuries inflicted on a slave, a fine equal to half the slave's value was imposed. Under Hammurabi, the high priests and the temple lost their influence over lawmaking. For the first time in history, crimes began to be treated in a purely legal sense, not as violations of sacred commandments, but as offences against human life and the foundations of society. Judges were now appointees of the king, drawn from the city's inhabitants, while priests served only as assistants. A judge who disregarded the law could be stripped of his position. Hammurabi's laws protected the rights of women and children to the extent possible in that era. A woman was a full person and an independent member of the family. After marrying, she could leave her husband if he turned out to have premarital debts, if her spouse was unfaithful, accused her of adultery, or assaulted her. She could take her case to court, and upon proving her claims, dissolve the marriage. She was then free to remarry. If a wife was childless or fell seriously ill, the husband had the right to take a second wife. However, he could not choose a concubine on his own if his wife herself offered him a slave woman for cohabitation. A husband could not abandon a sick wife either. If a man's wife died, he could not claim her dowry. The entire inheritance went to their children. If a man had children both from his wife and from a lawful concubine, then after his death, every child received an equal share of his property. The concubine mother and her children were granted their freedom. Of course, not all residents of Babylon enjoyed equal rights. Yet, the honored position of women in the family and the protection of children from a father's tyranny speak to the sophistication of society at that time. Hammurabi took the first step toward ensuring that the strong shall not oppress the weak. So it is stated in his laws. After Hammurabi's death, the Babylonian kingdom lost its influence in Mesopotamia. 5 centuries later, Babylon came under pressure from Assyria, which had become a mighty power by that time. To repel the Assyrian threat, Babylonian kings sought support from neighboring countries. The standoff between Babylon and Assyria would stretch on for the next 5 centuries. In the 8th century BCE, Babylon was weakened by the onslaught of the Chaldeans. Finding themselves in a vulnerable position, Babylonian rulers asked for help from their very enemies, the Assyrians. Babylon and Assyria formed an alliance, a fateful decision. The Assyrian king helped defeat the Chaldeans, but in return sent his own governor to Babylon. And so the Babylonian state found itself under Assyrian control, and the Babylonians soon realized the weakness of their position. Assyrian kings had always appointed their eldest sons as governor of Babylon, but this tradition was broken by Sennacherib. He had previously tried to rule Babylon directly, but the city constantly rebelled. So Sennacherib decided to change his approach. He placed on the Babylonian throne a young Babylonian aristocrat named Belibni, who had been raised at the Assyrian court. The calculation was simple, familiar to the Babylonians, yet loyal to Assyria. Sennacherib himself called him a puppy raised in my palace. But the puppy quickly bared its teeth. Belibni conspired with the Babylonians and raised a revolt. Sennacherib crushed the rebellion and removed Belibni. This time he appointed his own son, Ashur-nadin-shumi, as governor. But he too did not last long. The Elamites invaded Babylonia, captured the prince, and in all likelihood executed him. After this, revolts in the city erupted one after another. Then Sennacherib returned to Babylon with a single intention: to destroy the city. This is how he recorded his ruthlessness. With the bodies of Babylonians I filled the squares of the city. Gold and precious stones I divided among my people. The gods who dwelt in the city were seized by the hands of my warriors and smashed. The city and its houses, from foundation to wall, I destroyed and consigned to fire. In the end, Sennacherib ordered the charred ruins flooded. His soldiers breached the Araktu River that ran through the city, and water filled the streets. Thus was Babylon destroyed. And then something happened that contemporaries perceived as a direct act of the gods. In 681 BCE, Sennacherib was killed by his own sons. For the people of Mesopotamia, this was no palace conspiracy. It was the verdict of Marduk. The god whose statue had been taken from Babylon had exacted his revenge through blood. Babylon's restoration began immediately after Sennacherib's death. The work took about 20 years, and the finest builders participated. New palaces were erected on the sites of destroyed ones with unprecedented splendor. The Babylon, whose ruins have largely survived to our day, was laid down precisely then, in the 7th century BCE. The city's restoration was carried out under the Assyrian king Esarhaddon, and it was around this time that a new chapter in Babylon's history opened, the Neo-Babylonian period. The surviving Babylonians gradually returned home. Along with them came the Chaldeans, who by that time already populated Mesopotamia. The very same Chaldeans whose raids Babylon had once repelled began to intermingle with the local population, gain rights, and influence the affairs of state. Among these Chaldeans was Nabopolassar. He served as one of the military commanders of Nineveh, the capital of Assyria. When the Assyrian Empire began to decline and lose its grip over its subject nations, Nabopolassar raised a rebellion along with his army. He renounced Assyrian authority and marched toward Babylon, conquering one city after another. In time, Nabopolassar became one of the most powerful rulers of Mesopotamia. In the conquered Babylon, he ascended the throne and founded the 10th Neo-Babylonian dynasty, also known as the Chaldean dynasty. Later, in 612 BCE, his forces brought down the capital of Assyria, Nineveh, and so a Chaldean rebel brought the lands of Mesopotamia under his rule. After Nabopolassar's death, power passed to his son, Nebuchadnezzar II. He continued his father's work and became the one who led Babylon to a new golden age. Nebuchadnezzar II was born around 630 BCE. At roughly the same time in ancient Greece, the future poetess Sappho and the future founder of democracy, Solon, were born. They were all nearly the same age. Nebuchadnezzar's name in Akkadian sounded like Nabu Kuduri Usur, meaning Nabu, protect my firstborn. The god Nabu in Akkadian mythology was considered the patron of wisdom. Nebuchadnezzar II inherited an empire that already stretched across all of Mesopotamia, yet he continued his father's conquests. He pushed its borders even further. The only unconquered rival remaining was Egypt, and this was because the two sides were equal in strength. Under Nebuchadnezzar II, the Neo-Babylonian kingdom experienced its golden age. Tribute from subject cities that had previously flowed to Nineveh was now directed to Babylon. Residents of other cities relocated to the capital. Plenty of hired work appeared, and the population grew rapidly. Early in his reign, Nebuchadnezzar decided to restore the ziggurat from the time of Hammurabi. This ziggurat was called Etemenanki, which translates as House of the Foundation of Heaven and Earth, and its construction was overseen by an architect named Arad Aheshu. Once rebuilt, Etemenanki became the tallest structure in Mesopotamia, and later the inspiration for the myth of the Tower of Babel. It was dedicated to Marduk, the supreme god of Babylon. The construction of city walls, canals, and palaces was carried out primarily by hired workers. Their labor was paid for by temple officials, who simultaneously oversaw construction projects in the capital. The funds came from the temple's reserves, which consisted mainly of royal gifts, gold, silver, and war spoils.